Hello, everyone. And so you know that this podcast episode might even scare you or shock you. Well, for this episode, we're going to be talking about the classic 1931 horror film Frankenstein. And I'm doing this opening credit scene. The guy doing this intro about the film. So anyway, hello everybody, and welcome to another film podcast episode, Halloween special. That, as I did mention, that we'll be talking about Frankenstein from 1931 by Universal, and based on the play and book by Mary Shelley. And I'm looking forward to talk about this one, and this podcast might go less than an hour or however I want to. However it goes. I mean, but anyway, we have a special guest here for tonight, and I haven't had him since my Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 podcast episode from last year. Please welcome back Mark Justice.
Hey, Brendan, how are you?
I'm doing good. Long time no see.
Yes, it's been quite a while. So thank you for asking me to be back on the show.
Yeah, and I want to say that thank you so much for volunteering to join this episode with me. And it is like another difficult for me to find some guests who have volunteered to talk about the Universal monsters.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I grew up watching Universal. I love them. I watch them regularly, and every time I watch them, I feel like a little kid. So no, I'm glad to talk about Frankenstein.
Yeah, me too. And this film is one of my first Universal monster films I ever watched as a kid before I discovered the other ones.
Oh, nice. That's a good one to start with.
Yep. And speaking of, let's talk about how we first discovered this film for the first time. I mean, I'll start with me. So,
Sure.
like, I remember hearing about the Universal monsters, but I never watched any of them. But Abbott Costello Frankenstein was the film that got me into Universal, and the Universal monsters, which I never seen. So Abbott Costello Frankenstein wasn't my first Universal monster or film because that one is a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember going to my local video store, actually down in my old hometown in Georgia, and my old local Blockbuster, which it used to exist back then. I remember I was looking at some VHS tapes that you could actually buy, and I saw the one that says Frankenstein, and so I did. So I kind of bought the tape. I actually buy it, not rented. And I gave this film a try, and it looks kind of interesting. I kind of did like it, and I only saw that film as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was like 9 or 10 when I saw it. I think I was 9.
Okay.
Yeah, it was so interesting. And that I know that the monster is played by Boris Karloff,
Mm-hmm.
the Grinch himself.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect voice for the Grinch.
Yeah. That's film how I first discovered Boris Karloff. But I first discovered him in Abbott Costello Meet the Killer.
Okay.
That was released 2 years after Meet Frankenstein. I mean, and we'll get to more about Boris Karloff a little later after. So Frankenstein is one of my first Universal horror films I ever watched. I mean, not until a few years later that I started watching the other monster films like Dracula, The Wolfman, The Invisible Man, and The Mummy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that film really got me into watching them. I used to watch those a lot with my dad.
Nice.
I mean, me and him are like Universal monster fans, including Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, those came at in the into the 40s. The Universal had kind of stopped doing the horror films by the time Costello's comedies kind of came around, but it was a way to kind of keep their monsters going. But yeah, I remember seeing those as a kid too, and I was young enough to kind of still be scared a little bit by Frankenstein, especially the Mummy. Um, I was young enough to. I mean, I knew it was a comedy, but there were still moments that were still scary to me because the monsters were real to me. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I totally get it. But Universal has a look and a feel that no one has been able to capture, and so those films are kind of timeless for me. That yeah,
Yeah, these films are timeless, and we own. And I did my research that this film wasn't the first Frankenstein movie. There was actually a original silent film by Thomas Edison. I mean,
right.
I think it was
Yeah,
made in the 1918s. I think.
yeah. Somewhere around that area. Yeah, and I've seen bits and pieces of it. I mean, it's pretty amazing. As an early example of film. Yeah. But this
Yeah,
this one Universal by this time because they they kind of knew what they were doing. They got great source material. I mean, that's what they really started doing with between Bram Stoker's Dracula, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. They were really pulling from these classic pieces of literature. And although the stories are, especially the Frankenstein one, wildly different, and in some ways, um, it's they're faithful to the core of what Shelley was doing, at least for Frankenstein. I mean, you don't have the bookend. That came about much later in a much later version where you begin at when they're tracking the monster down in the frozen tundra, and then you hear a lot. The story is a series of flashbacks. This kind of just gets right to it, but I think it's a great beginning. The scene where they're looking over the funeral and you see that they're going to be robbing the grave, and they're
yeah,
searching for corpses. I mean, it's a really visceral beginning
yeah.
to a horror film.
That is a great scene, and so yeah, like I want to. So I've never seen the silent film version of it. I heard of it. I mean, I just never saw it. I mean, and and I know that the play in the book but is by the teenager Mary Shelley. Like
Right.
was she really a teenager during that time when she
When she
wrote?
wrote it, I think so. Yeah, she and her husband. Um, you see a little bit of this in Bride of Frankenstein, where they're kind of talking, sitting around talking about Shelley's. She's Elsa Lanchester is um, playing the bride and also plays Mary Shelley. So yeah, she wrote this gothic horror masterpiece, and it's still these themes that she writes about. It's science fiction, it's horror, and I like that they really go out of their way to capture the essence of the elements of this, and it even introduces those themes in the very beginning, where the concept of of God, of creation, and then when Frankenstein says, "Now I know what it feels like to be God,"
Yeah,
and that really captures his hubris.
it's
I think I can do what God does, and it comes back to bite him
yeah. This
almost literally.
Yeah, I just feel like Dr. Frankenstein. When he's digging up dead bodies, like he's trying to create life. It's like he's playing God.
Hmm.
It
Certainly.
yeah, it's kind. Yeah,
And
it's
he
like
makes no bones about it. Like he's exploring these things, and that's why he invites people over. In the other Frankenstein movies, the other incarnations, it's kind of done, somewhat secretly. But this one, he's making no bones about it. Like everyone knows he's playing with life and death. Everyone kind of realizes. I don't think they realize to the extent that he's been doing his experiments. But that's why he invites him in and even tells his old professor, like, look, I learned everything I could from you, but I've gone beyond this and beyond what you taught me, and I'm kind of in a territory that no one else has been in before. And that's that mad scientist, quote unquote. We see that's still a trope. That's still a caricature, caricature type or caricature, in a lot of horror films. So Shelley's works is still endures to this day.
Yeah, I gotta check out her original book of this. Like,
It's a great book. It's I think one of the best examples of gothic horror. Far superior to. I'm going to get some hate from Dracula fans, but Stoker's book, and I need to revisit it again. But I remember reading it the first time. I got maybe halfway in, maybe not quite halfway, and I'm like, ah, this is so boring because it's a series of letters back and forth. Whereas Shelley's book is more or less prose and action and things like that. But you really get to see a different side of the monster because the monster can speak and the monster's been hunting Frankenstein down
yeah,
'cause, and so you really see the human side of the monster, which you do get in the movie too. I used to teach a horror class, and there's this concept or a theory called romantic isolation, and in that means that you see the monstrous in the human and the human in the monster. So, for example, the monstrous in the human, you see like Larry Talbot when he turns into the Wolfman. So
yeah,
we identify with the creature in all of us, the beast within. And so when he kills and we find it satisfying, we kind of identify with that side of ourselves, this monstrous. So we kind of identify with the killer. And so that makes us kind of partake and kind of partake, in a way, which is fun. But then we also see the reverse where we see the human in the monster. And I think Frankenstein is a really great example of that. And also King Kong. So these are just
yep.
creatures who are just, you know, I mean, King Kong, I have a lot of sympathy for, and I think it's a tragic monster, if you want to call him that. Just a creature who's just put to the wrong environment. And I, to this day, like especially after seeing Jackson's Kong, where you see so much of the humanity in King Kong, I just can't watch it anymore. I hate the ending. I just like no. I'll watch the beginning, but I
uh,
can't finish it. It's like no, it's just too painful. But with
yeah,
Frankenstein, you see the human elements. You see him searching for connection, like to his creator, like a child. He's an innocent child, not knowing what's going on, even though he's got that criminal brain. But uh, you see that in the creature, which makes ultimately you empathize or sympathize with him.
Uh, yeah, and Mark and I gotta say that like after like the monster was created, I mean, when I watched this film, I mean, I know he was. We get a first look at him when he was walking through the door, and it's like it's almost like first Frank the monster doesn't know much now. I mean, he's just looking around. He just don't know where he's at. I mean, I that like that one scene when Frankenstein opens the light of the shed or the shows the sun. The monster just almost like reach out his
Hmm.
hands. It's almost like he's trying to reach it. I mean,
Right.
it's almost like Frankenstein is educating the monster.
Sure. And we also see the simple mindedness of the creature, where he's trying to reach up for the sun, doesn't quite grasp what it is. He just sees that it's beautiful, or he wants it, um, and you see the same thing, like he inadvertently does things. I mean, he's tormented, by Fritz, uh, with the fire and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
the scene that really shows, and this was one of the scenes that was censored in the original version, the scene with the girl by the pond.
Oh yeah, that was like one of
Yeah.
the lost scenes, and they finally put it back
Yeah.
in the film. Like,
Yeah. So which is great. It's because you really see, he just doesn't quite understand. He sees this moment where this girl has compassion for him and isn't afraid of him. And then that scene evolves where now they're playing with like making little boats out of flowers, and
yeah,
Frankenstein just that's like so amazing to him. And then it's just the tragedy of him tossing the little girl in there thinking that she will float as well, you know. Yeah, but
yeah,
just
that
yeah.
even shocked me. I was like, Wow!" It's like, and that girl was drowning in the pond. I mean, if you know, she's only a few inches from the shore, but after that, there was another scene was shot when Frankenstein walks away. You can see that she was actually drowned. The
Hmm.
girl.
Right, right. Yeah, drown, and then yeah, because that was the first time I saw it. Well, most of the times I saw it when I was a kid, they don't have the scene where he meets the girl at the pond, and then it kind of cuts away, and the next thing you know, when everyone's dancing, here comes the dad bringing the girl back, and you miss what happened in between because they make that jump like she was murdered and it's Frankenstein. Um,
Mm.
but we see it in the full version, and then you see Frank the monster's reaction to that, which is like sorrow, sadness, shock, disbelief, like confusion, and so again, it kind of reminds the audience that this is a creature that, I mean, literally, it was kind of just born. It's like a baby, doesn't know the consequences of its actions, and that's all the more pitiful.
Yeah, he was just. It's like he is just born, like a few days after being created by his own master,
Right.
and
Exactly.
is and I gotta say, I mean, I know the monster can confuses sometimes in the film. I mean, he's like this is like his first time being out in the world. I mean, he's just uh, goes around. I mean, he doesn't show up at the village, but he just shows at Frankenstein's house, and he
Hmm.
tortures his fiance. And
Yeah, and in the book, it's a little different ending. I won't spoil it for you. But it's similar plot devices. There's the marriage, what's going on, but the monster is is intentional. There's a lot more malicious thought about revenge in that one. So he does seek out Frankenstein's fiance, and to with the intent of affecting the wedding. But it's a much different story in that regard. It's a really great book. I think you'd enjoy reading it.
yeah, and I know you say you won't give a spoiler, but I think I want to give a spoiler. But in the
Okay.
book,
Mhm.
that the monster kills the fiance, and
Right.
but in the film, he didn't kill the fiance.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, the monster has a horrific end. In the windmill,
Yeah.
with the fire. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's horrifying.
I love that when he does that sound like when he almost attacked the fiance.
Right. Yeah. And he just kind of stumbles upon her, Then that scene where he breaks in, I was just trying to imagine because she's unaware of it. And that's one of the types of horror that there is. Like, one is where the audience knows that there's something bad going to happen. The other one is where the characters know. Other one's like when no one knows. And so the audience sees Frankenstein come through the window quietly stalking, and the fiance is just completely, oblivious. So I was just imagining the horror in an audience in 1931 seeing this for the first time, just the
And
terror of what they felt. It was probably pretty palpable because it's a great scene.
yeah, and what I heard and that while they're before shooting that shot, I mean, I think Boris Karloff and the actress who plays the fiance, they went through like trying to practice like their steps, and then Boris like teaches her like some a few like practice for this scene. I
It would
think
make sense to have it all choreographed out because a lot depends on the timing, how long she's standing there. Then she moves, with the flowers because she's wearing the wedding dress, and his like lunging at her and kind of going after her or pins her against the door. So yeah, it's definitely a timing thing because she has to sit there long enough and wait for him to get close to her before she stands up and moves. So I'm sure there was someone behind the camera going, okay, hold on, and now
Hmm.
go. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and I know that this film was my first Universal monster film. But I know I mentioned a few years later I started watching the other Universal monsters, and including The Bride of Frankenstein, and
yeah.
which is a direct sequel to this film. I mean, and I remember saw this for the first time. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is a sequel to Frankenstein?"
Hmm. Yeah, in the actual book, there's Bride and Frankenstein are actually part of the original Shelley's novel. So they're both of those elements are in there.
Y-
But yeah, I love Bride of Frankenstein as well. I in some ways I think it's a superior movie
Yeah, and
than the
it's one
first
of
one.
the best sequels.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly. Now I know Karloff didn't want the monster to be talking, but he does talk, in the book.
yeah,
So, but there are some scenes. There are some. They began bringing in humor in
yeah,
the bride, along with the very beginning with the woman who's screaming about it. She shows up in the Invisible Man as well. She's
mm,
as a character actor who does this kind of very emotional kind of character who screams a lot. Uh,
yeah.
wonderful cast. James Whale, directing it, but you have
Oh
this.
yeah,
Yeah, so you
I
have a
want to
lot of
talk.
humor.
Yep, I mean James Whalen does an amazing job making this film. I mean, I think they almost have the other director who directed Dracula for this film,
Mhm.
but that's what I think. I mean, but James Whalen does an amazing job making this film. I mean,
Yeah, Whale's great. There's a good movie that talks about him. It's like a biopic in a way. It's called Gods and Monsters, and it's about Whale's last years of his life and kind of talking about um, Frankenstein and those kinds of things. And it's a really good movie. But yeah, his direction is wonderful. Like the cast is great. There's humor. There's some genuine pathos at the scene where Frankenstein shows up at the beggar's hut, the blind beggar, and kind of introduces him to even though he doesn't like fire, he introduces him like to smoking a cigar
yeah,
and gives him some soup and some wine and bread, and things like
yeah,
that. And there's a scene where because he's like, the he's like, are you God has brought me or brought you to me. We are two different people. He realizes
yeah,
he can't speak. We're two people who needed each other. And
yeah.
it's a very touching scene. In what I
Gore.
was exactly. Yeah, it doesn't last very long. You can't have it last very long. But
Yeah,
but it leaves certainly once that material is done, then Universal like realized, man, we got to keep on going with this. And that's when they started bringing in, continue on with like Son of Frankenstein, which
yeah,
I really love that movie. I love the set. The sets in this movie are all the movies, the
yeah.
Frankenstein, are gorgeous.
Speaking of sets, I mean, I want to talk about the laboratory sets
Hmm.
when Victor, like Henry created the monster. I mean,
Yeah.
the sets was incredible. I mean, all the laboratory electrical things. It's just awesome. I mean, I even heard they used the same sets in other films after this.
Oh,
Un-
certainly. Yeah, it got a
Until,
lot of they got a lot of use, even pieces parts of it.
yeah,
Um,
they
yeah,
used it
certainly.
until the end of the 70s.
Yeah, they weren't throwing things away at the time because it was just cheaper to reuse it, and it's so good. Why wouldn't you want to use it? Yeah, between that and the castle, the Dracula's castle, some of those sets are gorgeous. The house in Son of Frankenstein, the house they live in is just kind of this beautiful Art Deco kind of house, um, similar to what you see like in the Black Cat in a way, which was really another Boris Karloff movie with Bela Lugosi, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Speaking of
but that's
Bela Lugosi, I mean, I know I didn't mention in my Dracula podcast episode that Bela Lugosi was the original casting choice for playing the monster in this film, but apparently Bella didn't want to wear all this makeup and doesn't want not interested in playing the monster
right.
in this because
Right, he didn't wanna cover his face, he wanted people to see his good looks, and so he turned it down. I mean, ironically, he ends up playing the monster down the road, in another film, um,
yeah, but
but
yeah, he did play the monster in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman,
right.
which is a really good film.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
I love
that is
that.
like one of the first crossover monster films.
Right, and then House of Frankenstein, we got all 3, the big 3, and the Dracula was doing those things with its sequels and House of Dracula. I think House of Frankenstein, the Frankenstein series, I think is the most successful of all of the franchises. I love the
Yeah,
Wolfman. I love the Mummy. I love all of these. The sequels
yeah,
to the Mummy are not nearly as good, the um, but the House of Frankenstein and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman just. I mean, those delighted me as a kid. I just stay up late at night and watch those with our local
yeah.
horror hosts. They're just so fun.
Yeah, Frankenstein has made so many films after this one, including the ones outside of Universal, and
Hmm.
it. And I discovered the Frankenstein monster in cartoons before the original films, and they even made a crossover with the Chipmunks in Alvin and the Chipmunks meet
Interesting.
Frankenstein.
Okay, I was going to ask you where you saw a cartoon Frankenstein because I'm trying to think as a kid they might have been some kind of like uh the most cartoony Frankenstein I remember was on the box of Frankenberry cereal. But there was some kind of a Groovy Ghoulies or some kind of cartoon that had like a Frankenstein, and there was a Hanna-Barbera cartoon I think that had a Frankenstein in it.
Oh,
Um,
like I think Frankenstein was in an episode of Scooby Doo. Where are you? And
oh, it could be something like that. Yeah, some kind of a creature like that. Yeah, those meddling kids. But yeah,
yeah,
the Universal, Frankenstein. I mean, these movies were so successful that's what happened when Hammer Studios in the 50s began doing horror films, and they started doing remakes of all the Universal properties. So they began with Curse of Frankenstein and the Horror of Dracula, with Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and they did the Mummy,
and
yeah,
and
the Werewolf of London,
and I
or
also
Curse of the
did
Werewolf.
mention that they also made like a rip-off comedy of Frankenstein, of Young Frankenstein.
Right, Mel Brooks, yeah, his parody, comic genius, 1970, I want to say 74, um, 73, 74, somewhere in that area. Yeah, Young Frankenstein's really funny,
Yeah,
just right on top, and the performance, the cast was amazing. If you're not a Mel Brooks fan, then you probably won't like it, but it's really really funny satire. Gene
yeah,
Wilder just eats up the screen. Yeah, it's really really wonderful.
yeah. Maybe I should do a podcast episode about that film.
About Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, Das Frankenstein.
You're right, exactly. Yeah,
uh,
yeah. So
it's
which of the Universal Frankenstein movies is your favorite?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, I know that Abbott Costello Frankenstein is one of my favorite, but that doesn't count because this was a comedy. But it's still
Mhm.
one of my favorite of all time. But
Oh yeah, it's
I would
fantastic.
I would prefer the original that we're talking about right now and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, those are all great.
Yes.
Yeah, I love the continuity that Universal had developed between these because, you know, I mean, Bride takes up immediately after the end of Frankenstein. I mean, they're at the windmill, the remains of, and that's where we see what kind of goes on, and then we have that continuing on with Son continues on the tradition. Ghost picks up where Son left off, and then House of Frankenstein after that. So I just love that they're keeping this, and the monster we realize the monster can't die. He kind of keeps on
Yeah.
coming back, and by that time they're different. Glenn Strange had played him as well, and the makeup is basically the same, which looks different than Shelley's description. A much better, more accurate description is in or likeness is either in the Hammer Curse of Frankenstein or the Frankenstein that came out, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I think in the, I want to say the 1990s, late 90s, with Robert De Niro as the monster, was also a pretty good version as well.
Yeah, and I want to. So let's talk about uh, Boris Karloff, who played the monster, the Grinch himself. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean Boris Karloff, he is an amazing casting choice for playing the monster. I mean,
Hmm.
when I look at him and I was like, I know when I mean. I know I discovered him in Abbott Costello Meet the Killer of Boris Karloff. I mean, when I saw the makeup, I was like, oh my god, that he was from Abbott Costello Meet the Killer
Yeah, because
and
he's got
Dr.
those kind of
Jekyll and
sunken
Mr. Hyde.
cheeks. Yeah, he's got those thin, kind of gaunt features anyway. Kind of tall and lanky, and then with the boots that made him over tall, and then the prosthetic on his head, you know and from what I've read in the years, you know, that the story is that his makeup was so horrific that, you know, cast people used to sometimes to kind of eat with a something over his face because it was just too horrific for people to see and
Yeah.
eat lunch. Which I don't know, our sensibilities are a little different now, but I just love that story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say about about the makeup. Like, I mean, I know the before they put the makeup on Boris. I mean, I noticed as the filmmakers knows there's something peculiar about Karloff. I mean, they took a look at him. I mean, I know that his face is almost look like a little skull face
Mm-hmm.
sort of looking. I mean, and they I know they picture him like a horror nightmare skull skeleton sort of guy thingy
Yeah, his
because of his
cheeks are
head looks like
sunken in.
yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah.
maybe I thought this in my head, it's like why not have him play the monster?
Yeah, it's a great choice. Yeah, and they with that, you know, flat head and the bolts in the neck, which have become, you know, kind of definable. Like anytime you see a caricature of Frankenstein or a toy, it's got that flat head. You know, that it's just
Yeah,
Jack Pierce's makeup is amazing.
yeah,
In
I
this.
like Jack Pierce his makeup style for this. I mean, he also does the Mummy, the
Yeah,
Wolfman, and
yeah. Did Dracula? He did a lot of hair work. He did a lot of stuff with Universal and other movie companies. But it's definable. You know, the stuff that he does. You know, early on, the makeup effects that he did are still to this day, we're talking about them, you know, nearly 100 years later. That's how good they are, and that's how much they stand up to scrutiny. You know, they're just solid, really practical effects. And even like the dissolves in the Wolfman, where you see these gradual placements of hair, you know, it's like it's still effective when you finally see Lon Chaney as a Wolfman. Like, okay, yeah, this is pretty great from the way he walks and kind of walks on the balls of his feet to, you know, little details like that. But yeah, Pierce's makeup really brings the monster, well, not to put a pun on it, but to life. You know, it's a very memorable makeup.
yeah, and then is yeah, I love that flat head that you mentioned. It's I mean I know there's some outside Universal Frankenstein films that sometimes they make redesign the monster but without the flat head. I mean,
Hmm.
including Young Frankenstein. I mean, it's just
Right.
the head's
Yes.
normal and
Yeah, and you'll see that again in the Hammer Frankenstein movies too. Those are a lot more visceral. Have you seen any of the Hammer stuff from the 50s and 60s?
mm, I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, those were kind of remade all the Universal stuff, and there's much more of a gothic kind of feel. Whereas Universal has that wonderful sets, and it's like the Wolfman has those foggy woods and the gothic architecture, the interiors of Frankenstein, you know, laboratory and Dracula's castle. Uh, Universal has a definitely a or a Hammer has a gothic feel as well, but those were in color. You saw blood. That was the big difference in what Universe or Hammer did, and that's the stuff I grew up on. I mean, horror of Dracula was probably one of my earliest memories of watching a horror movie, and to this day, there's a scene like I remember as a kid, like that's the one that scared me, you know, where Dracula shows up. But Curse of Frankenstein is, I think, one of the best Frankenstein movies made. And again, I'm going back to like early childhood stuff, you know, like these are all very nostalgic for me. So every time I watch them, especially at Halloween time, it's like, yeah, this is just extra special. I'm a kid every time, you know, I'm watching them.
Yeah, and also like Boris Karloff did an amazing job playing the monster. I mean, I want to talk more about the flathead.
Sure.
I mean the flathead. I mean, well, I mean I know what I heard. Like I think in one of the other Frankenstein movies. I mean, especially with Glenn Strange when he plays the Frankenstein monster like two or three times. I mean,
Hmm.
including Abbott Costello Frankenstein. I mean, I know that Jack Pierce, like whenever time you put the makeup on, I mean, when after shooting the film, I mean, when they took all this makeup off, including the flathead, I mean, once they like almost split it open, like but all the top it says spilling water sweat.
It would make sense, yeah, because it's got to be sealed up. Probably, you got to put a seal around so nothing, gets out. But that would make perfect sense because it would
Yeah,
probably be
and
very
it
hot. And then
kind of
you're also
glows,
working
doesn't
under
it?
studio lights. There are a lot of heat, and those old lights have put on a lot of heat. So usually sets were kept cold because those lights were so hot. But under all that makeup and wearing that heavy costuming, because that was all padded as well to make him look, more imposing. It would make perfect sense that he was just sweating buckets.
Yeah, and I love how Boris really does act like a monster in this, especially when he's being tortured by fire. It's like,
Yeah, and you you
all of
yeah.
his grunt sounds. I mean, I love the grunt sound that he does, and also he makes some little weird monkey or puppy cross between a monkey and a puppy sounds like.
Right, yeah, those tiny little grunts, and I think that kind of shows a range of those grunts are like he's like searching, he's like wanting something, he's needing something, and you see that kind of softer side of him, and then the grunts only come out as when he's angry, and the only time he really gets angry is when he's provoked and he's tormented. And
Yeah.
that's what really turns him bad. I mean, he's got the criminal brain to work through, but he's fine generally until he starts getting tormented with fire, and that's something you'll see in the rest of the movies. There's the fire,
Yeah.
those things are
But
part
the
of it.
monster never said that this amazing line in saying "Fire bad."
Right, because he doesn't speak in this one.
Yeah,
Right, he says fire bad, I think, in Bride of Frankenstein,
I
and
had
that's
to
when the
look back to that
yeah,
film.
and that's because the hermit is kind of lighting a cigar, and Frankenstein reacts to it, and he's like, fire bad, and he's like, no, my friend, fire good. And then that's when he gives him a cigar to light up, so you see
Yeah,
Frankenstein smoking a cigar. So that's
yeah,
that's kind of great. You probably don't see that every
yeah.
day.
It was really great. Good.
Right, right, with drinking and eating, yeah, all
And I
those
just
things, yeah.
realized that I remember back when, after I watched Abbott Costello meet Frankenstein when I was a kid, I used to watch it a few times before I discovered the original Frankenstein. I did dress up as the Frankenstein monster when I was a kid back in my elementary school years.
Nice. Did you have a costume? Like, what you like the mask that goes just on the front of the face, or did you have a
Yeah,
whole head thing?
it was like it was just a mask.
Yeah, like those plastic ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I did dress up as the monster when I was a kid. I was like probably 7 or 8.
Yeah,
I
that sounds
remember.
about right. Yeah, I think about every kid at some time has dressed up as one of these monsters. I'm sure I had a Frankenstein mask or Wolfman or something like that as a kid, you know. Yeah, I always wanted something scary like that.
Yeah, I think so. Boris Karloff. I mean, he only placed the monster 3 times in 3 films: the original Bride and Son of.
Hmm.
Son of Frankenstein was probably his last time playing the monster.
Yeah, but by then he had become such a sensation because he was also playing the Mummy.
Yep.
He did the Mummy as well, again under Jack Pierce's amazing makeup. You've never seen a mummy look like him since. I mean, the Hammer Mummy is terrifying. Christopher Lee as the Mummy it's got that creepy wrapped in bandages look. It's this terrifying mummy. That's the mummy that haunts me.
Yeah.
But I love the Universal Mummy. I just love that movie because then we're looking at the early 1930s. I love the sets, the design, the kind of Art Deco look of the film. But yeah, Karloff became really very popular and very famous and
Yeah.
successful, and because he kept on doing horror films all the way up, to the end, like The Raven with Vincent Price and Peter Lorre, which is a, very entertaining movie, a lot of fun, a lot of comedy. and he was doing horror. He did the Grinch, with that
Yep.
wonderful, wonderful voice. Yeah,
Yep.
he was always a gentleman, always soft spoken in all of
And
his movies.
and Universal was gonna have him played the monster in Abbott Costello Meets Frankenstein, but he didn't had nothing to do with it because he is retiring from playing the monster.
Yeah, he's probably tired of wearing all the heavy boots and all the heavy makeup and all that stuff like that. And he was doing other things. I mean, he was very busy shooting other movies, other horror movies as well. He was still doing other horror movies, just not as Frankenstein. But yeah, he was quite busy in the 40s and 50s.
And he was in two Abbott Costello films, Meet the Killer and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I have not seen either of those. Just the Frankenstein and the Mummy.
Oh, I'm talking about the Abbott Costello
Right,
ones. Like,
right. Yeah, I've only seen Abbott Costello meet Frankenstein and Abbott Costello meet the Mummy, or whatever that one was called. Yeah, those are the only two of the Universal crossovers I've seen,
yeah,
and they're
and
fun, especially Frankenstein. It's just done so well. It is very funny. It's like Abbott and Costello are at the top of their game. They're not my favorite comedy team. There's a lot of mean spiritedness in their comedy, but I'm more of a Three Stooges or Laurel and Hardy fan. But for sure, those are really funny movies.
yeah, and if you want to check out my Abbott Costello Meets Frankenstein podcast episode that I did last year on Halloween, feel free to watch it anytime you want.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I did it with the gang,
Oh,
and
nice.
so back to the film. So I just remember that what I remember when they dug up the cemetery. I mean they when when Frankenstein and Frisk digging up were digging up the body in the grave, and after the Wooks, the folks left and they buried it and they dug him back up, and then I realized they also discovered another body that was hanging. I
Right. Yeah. And he's just kind of there, and it's kind of shocking to see it because you're not used to seeing corpses just hanging. It's still a striking image, and Fritz is even afraid to go up there, and he's like, "Oh, it's not going to hurt you," and he cuts him down unceremoniously. That's when they realize they can't use it because his neck's broken, his brain's no good, so they got to look for more bodies. So you see this beginning, like Frankenstein, you see the level that he's going at to try to find these bodies. He's not just doing tissue, he's not just doing organs or animals, he's going full blown. We're going to bring we're going to make a
and I
person.
and I was wondering if they're using some bodies to put them in, just use the body parts like the arm and the leg, and they just stick them, kind of just
Right.
dish them.
Yeah, I think at the time, I think in the context of the movie, I think he was looking for a brain specifically. But yeah, because I don't know how many different body parts or different bodies that he used to stitch together, to make a creature. Um, that you see that kind of patchwork quality more in the Hammer, and then the version with Robert De Niro where you see all the like almost looks like Jigsaw, from the Punisher comic book or movies anyway, where he's all sewn up and cut all to pieces, and so you see that quality. And so yeah, you got to wonder, because I know in some of the ones, especially in the Hammer, where they talk about like the hands that he takes from one body, and he's looking for specific things from dead bodies because he wants to bring all these really great pieces together and make this excellent body for his monster, his creation.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
and I gotta say that when he let Fritz steals a brain from Frankenstein's old class to college place,
yeah.
that's his teacher, who's played by Edward Sloan.
Hmm.
That he abandoned Frankenstein for his like steel bodies and corpses. And
Right, he had gone over the edge doing stuff, and that scene, it's played up for a lot of comic, you know, comic goodness in Young Frankenstein, where he says, "What brain did you give?" And he says, "Abby normal," like
oh yeah,
Abby normal, right? Instead of
like Abby
abnormal,
someone.
right? Exactly. Yeah, yeah, done really
I
well.
love that scene. It was so good. Like, is that what you done, Ben? Yeah, that scene never gets old.
No, it's
And
a great movie.
yeah, so I want to talk about Fritz Igor. I mean, I know in the film they don't call him Igor; they just call him Fritz. I mean,
Yeah,
who is played by Dwight Fry, he also plays Renfield in
Renfield.
Dracula.
Yeah, which is a fantastic part. He's completely maniacal. He's really that's
Yeah,
he's got some really great bit parts in these movies because he doesn't live very long. I mean, the monster eventually kills him because you see him hanging
yeah,
as well.
and the screaming is just shocking.
Yeah.
It's even more shocking than in Dracula at the end when he's choking Renfield to death.
hmm Yeah, he's a good character actor, and I'm just trying to imagine. Like, I bet it was just so much fun to do these roles. Like, you just got to kind of be way over the top because they were in uncharted territory. So they're still on the heels of vaudeville and stage. So there's these grandiose gestures. Excuse me. But his performances were really great. He plays a despicable character in that he wants to torture the monster and all those things like that.
Yeah,
But
all
yeah,
Frisk does is just torture the monster with a torch of flame.
yeah.
I mean, I
And
know
every
that.
time that character changes to Igor, and then Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi plays him, and because by that time he wants to take his brain and put it in the brain of the monster, but by then he's become Igor's become evil. He's become manipulative. He befriends the monster, rescues him, kind of revive and wants Frankenstein to kind of transfer his brain, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of a that's kind of a great character arc we see with Igor.
Yeah, and then yeah, and I know that. And also, Dwight Fry, he also plays another character in Bride of Frankenstein, but his character was different than Fritz.
Yeah, I don't recall what he did in that one, but yeah, another good character actor who was kind of in the stable in Universal, so he's going to be doing a lot of
Maybe that's
Universal
why
films.
Universal picked Dwight Fry as Fritz for this one because he experienced playing Renfield in Dracula.
It's hard to say. I mean, you have a stable of actors, and like the ones who did horror tended to do a lot more of the horror, But yeah, I mean, I think he got the role because he could do it well, and he certainly does. He's memorable.
Yeah, I don't know that Fritz doesn't have that much lines in this one.
Mm.
I mean, I know in some future films after this, sometimes they that sometimes they have his name Igor, and then but in some films, I mean, when he was with Frankenstein, sometimes he calls him Master
hmm
in some films, including Young Frankenstein. Like,
Right,
allow me, Master.
right. Yeah, sort of that subservient role, um, definitely played up. You know, by was it Feldman? I think plays him in Young Frankenstein. Marty Feldman. Um, no, it's not Igor. It's Igor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now it's pronounced Igor.
right. You see the hump on one side of his back on one scene, and
Yeah.
he moved over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Per- perhaps I could help you with that hump. What hump?
What hump?
That-
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's fun, and I
yeah.
know Frankenstein did really well at the box office too. It was like it made a lot of money in its initial run. Then it was re-released. It made a ton of money, and I think as most horror films tend to be low budget, even to today. That's why that's such a lucrative market for people
Yeah.
doing indie movies, or because it doesn't cost much to make. Generally, you're not paying people a lot of money. They're effects are relatively cheap. You're not going on a special effects extravaganza with CGI, and so they tend to be money makers.
Yeah.
And for sure, Universal, once they realized we got these two, they were just like on a roll, and they didn't really finish up their whole run until the 50s with the creature movies, the creature trilogy, which I
Yeah.
love, absolutely love those movies.
Yeah. So, and wow, it's been 50 minutes.
I
And
know, I know. It's been a quick conversation.
yeah. So I want to talk about a few more things before we wrap this up. Let's
Sure.
talk about Dr. Frankenstein himself.
Okay.
It's Henry, who is played by I
Clive
forgot the
Colin.
Sly Collin. I mean, he does an amazing job as playing Henry. But when I heard in the original novel, he was named Victor Frankenstein.
Right, right.
But
Which is
they
something you'll see that in the Hammer film. They keep that name Victor. Right.
yeah, and in the novel, I think they had his friend was called Henry. But in the film, there was another, but his character was called Henry Frankenstein, but and his friend is called Victor. So it's been reversed, like it's swapped.
Could be. It's been a long time since I read the novel, so that very well could be. But yeah, he has a great performance, and you see him really kind of unhinged. Then early on, I mean, he's passionate about what he does, and then he's kind of borderline, kind of crosses over the border into unhealthy kind of mental places. But he wants to prove himself. But he's got that arrogance, he's got that hubris, that pride, and egotistical kind of motivations, because now everyone's going to look at him. Now I know what it feels like to be God, and that's the
Yeah,
overstep. So it's a classical kind of fatal error, or as a tragic error, it ends up being his undoing in a way, or although not ultimately in this movie. But yeah, because then you have the moment where he kind of has come to his senses, and
yeah,
he thinks the monster's destroyed,
y-
and he's like kind of glad to be rid of it.
yeah. He wants to like wants to keep the monster, or he wants to destroy it.
Yeah, and then when he realizes it's just going to be problems, and so that's when he thinks he'll dispose of it humanely and kill it, and then he's like, okay, now I can move on and get married and not look back. But it didn't quite work out that way.
Yeah, and let's not forget this amazing catchphrase, a line, and after he brought the monster to life, like, "Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!"
Yes, it's a great scene.
Yeah, it's
It
one of
really
the
is.
most amazing catchphrases and movie references ever made in
Yeah,
movie history.
and
They even
it's
add
used
that in some other Frankenstein films too, and
right, or other movies. Weird Science uses that scene because the boys kind of basically are playing Frankenstein, but with their computer, and trying to create a digital Frankenstein monster or a girl who ends up, their version of their Frankenstein creation. They're trying to make a girl, or woman, and
yeah.
but
They even used that line in Bride of Frankenstein too. It was
right,
like after her eyes open, she's like, she's alive, alive.
yes. The Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great moment. I mean, Elsa Land, she just plays this so beautifully, and I love her kind of twitchy bird-like movements. The makeup again is great. I wanted more of her. I mean, by the time we're getting all the setup, and we only see her on screen for such a short time, and I'm like, and by then it's like it just ends so quickly. I'm like, wait, what? And that's what I would love to have seen, a much more interaction with the bride and how she interacts with the world, and that would have been really kind of cool.
yeah, and so I want to talk about like I want to talk about the actor who plays Frankenstein, Doctor Frankenstein. Like I forgot his name again. I mean,
Clive Cullen.
Clive Cullen. I mean, he does an amazing job. I mean, but he sadly died young. I mean, because some say he has a drinking problem.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
I think that's what I heard. He's like an alcoholic. I mean,
That's a shame. Yeah, it's too bad because he's so good and he's memorable. He just really is. You see him and he has the 1930s good looks, and but his range is really quite something. You see him in those calm moments where he's rational and very sensitive, and then you see the lunatic fringe where he is really just unhinged and like sees the moment of his creation. It's like it's too much. He can't restrain himself. So he's got quite a range.
yeah, and his so I want so we have time for one more thing to talk about. If you notice, like one of my favorite scenes is the mob scene.
Okay.
That's like one of the most famous, iconic scenes of movie history. Like of an angry mob chasing the monsters like, with torches and all that.
Hmm.
It was one of the most classic.
Yeah,
They're going,
torches, some kind of weapons. You got your. Sometimes they bring out pitchforks. They got the dogs. And they're running around that gorgeous set. Trying
yeah,
to trying to find the monster who kind of eludes them. Even the dogs. Um,
yeah, the hound dogs.
yeah, they don't pick up on his scent because he wants to get a hold of Frankenstein, and the monster does, and so that's ultimately the scene. And then obviously he gets him and takes him into the windmill.
Yeah, the burning windmill scene is awesome. I mean, it's like the monster has nowhere to go. Like after he throws Henry over the.
Yeah, I thought for sure Henry should have died on that. I mean, he falls. I guess his fall is broken by landing on one of the windmill blades. But
Yeah, when I
you think
saw it, I
he'd
was like,
break his
"Ooh,
back
that's
or
gonna
something.
hurt."
Yeah, yeah, yes. And then he falls from that. So the fact that he lives through that's quite miraculous. But yeah, those villagers. I mean, you pretty much now see that it's become a staple. It's become a trope that you see these angry mob of villagers all going out to hunt the monster. Not just in Frankenstein movies. I've seen it in all kinds of other horror films where there's something out there, and then there's the group of angry people going out to get them. Um,
Yeah, and
Even
especially
like in
the
Dawn of the Dead, 1978. You see like these people out there, not a mob, but they're organized with guns and they're going out in fields, and it's like a tailgating party. We're going to go out and we're going to shoot these zombies down. But yeah, that angry mob scene has just become so powerful and so much of a staple in horror films. We've seen it a lot.
yeah, especially when the monster is screaming at the when the windmill is burning, and it's so when
Yeah,
they got him trapped. I mean, even
yeah,
though
that
the
beat
monster
and
is not
falls down.
really dead yet, I mean, he's come back to in the sequel.
Yeah, it's a horrible way to go. I mean, by that time, because you know the monster doesn't really mean to hurt people. That's the thing.
Yeah,
And even though
it's
he's
like he's just
scary,
confused. I mean, he's just
confused. He doesn't understand the consequences of his actions. He just doesn't know anything about the world. Um, it's all the stuff that makes us feel sad for the monster. So every time I watch that movie, I still feel sad. I'm thinking, man, that's not a good way to go. Now we know later on that he doesn't really quite die. Um, but initially, you have to have a clean end. Even in horror films at the time had clean ends, and that got a little messier as it went on. Because horror films generally kind of, once they leave the realm of like literature and folklore and those kinds of things, kind of tap into our nightmare realms. So that's why they can be irrational, because our nightmares aren't
yeah,
rational either. But at the time, we're talking pre-code here, pre-code Hollywood. So 1931. But it has a good end. It's a satisfying end.
yeah.
You know.
And if you haven't noticed, Mark, I mean, well, they're filming the monster carry Henry up those stairs in the windmill tower. I mean, yeah, after they done this, I mean, Boris has to take 3 back surgeries after they do that shots.
Yeah. Yeah. That's. I know he's recovering slowly, so they can get married again. To the House of Frankenstein. I think that's the end. That's like the last line of the movie, right? To the House of Frankenstein.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
oh, you meant Boris. Oh, sorry, not the character. You meant
yeah,
Boris
I
Karloff.
meant Boris Karloff. I mean,
Oh,
that's
he
why
had to
I'm.
have surgery after the movie.
Yeah, he has to take 3 back surgeries
Oh,
after. I think it was right after they shot that scene when the monsters carry Henry up to the
okay.
windmill tower.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. Huh.
Yeah, I think that's.
Did he hurt his back filming the movie, or did he do something
I
else?
I think, but I am not sure. I mean,
Okay.
eh, so I think it has been an hour already. So
Yeah.
is there any more thoughts that you have about this film?
No, other than it's just one of the best examples of early horror there is. I love all the Universal films. They're not all as equally successful, but they're a part of my childhood. They always will be, and I try to watch them like once a year. Especially at Halloween time, it's a great time to watch them. So no, I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Frankenstein, all these all these movies are just always entertaining. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Frankenstein is a timeless classic,
Hmm.
including the sequel, The Bride of Frankenstein. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably won't do a podcast episode about it. I mean, but who knows? I mean,
Yeah. You
yeah.
got a
So
lot of movies to look through. You never know which one you're going to do next.
yeah, this and Boris Karloff. I mean, we'll never forget that he. I picture no one else who played the monster. I mean, I only, but I've always pictured Boris Karloff will always be one of the greatest Frankenstein monsters ever.
Oh, I agree. He's good. I mean, Glenn Strange does a good job.
Oh
I
yeah,
for this
including
movies.
Glenn
Yeah,
Strange.
he's because he's very much by that time they've got the Frankenstein thing down, like the walking very stiffly and things like that. If you ever do check out the Hammer Curse of Frankenstein, I think you'll like Christopher Lee as the monster. There's a lot more of the
Yeah,
humanity, but the broken humanity in him, and the subsequent films in those, not all of them are good, but different incarnations of the monster, and Peter Cushing continues to play the Victor Frankenstein, and so those are again very different. But as far as the Universal goes, no, they're night and day, different animals, Universal and Hammer, but they're both wonderful versions of the same story.
yeah, and then I mean, if if they would have cast Bela Lugosi as the Frankenstein monster, we would never had the great Boris Karloff to play the monster.
Yeah, yeah, he his career took off because he played that, and I think it really upset Bela Lugosi. I think he got really mad because he missed out the opportunity. Um, and by the time he had done, did the monster himself, his career was kind of on the wane, and Karloff's was on the rise. So that's just those choices we make, I guess. But yeah, I can't imagine a more perfect cast. And I wouldn't want anything changed. I'm glad that they finally brought out the full version with the scenes that were edited out early, censored, restored, just like what they did with King Kong. Brought those
Yep.
scenes back finally a full length, full version. But yeah. So if you've not anyone out there, if you've not seen Frankenstein, do yourself a favor, go out there and watch it. It's only like an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 9 minutes. You know, all the Universal stuff are pretty succinct because these were on parts of double bills. There was always more than one movie being shown, so they weren't really long movies. So
Yeah.
you can enjoy it 70 minutes, 80 minutes. You can have a great time.
Yeah. And and since we're about to wrap things up, and since I already covered Dracula and Frankenstein just now, so the next Universal monster film will be talk about the classic monster from all the way from Egypt. We'll talk about the 1932 classic film, also starring Boris Karloff, is The Mummy. That will
Yeah,
be the next podcast episode coming
great
soon.
movie. Great movie.
So yeah. So good night, folks, and a happy Halloween, and have a good night.